All right, another reading out of this Journeys Out of the Body. I don't know if you can see the whole thing or not, can you? By Robert A. Monroe. Let's get out of there. Okay. We're now in chapter 11, Gift or Burden. Very profound title. Kind of going through that personally. Some things in my life. Anyways. Early in the experimentation, a side effect began to manifest itself. It was not an out-of-body activity as such. What took place in states of deep relaxation prior to any separation. It is evidently called in the trade precognition. As I was laying down, my mind stilled and body relaxed. Without volition, the vision would occur. There would be a hissing sound localized in the forebrain, and it would get the sensation, and I would get the sensation of a small rectangular door hinged at one end and swinging downward to an angle about 45 degrees. This exposed a perfectly round hole. Immediately thereafter, I would see and semi-experience an event or incident like a dream, except that I retained all my consciousness and sense of awareness. The dream would be superimposed directly over outside stimuli. I could perceive both quite readily. I could not and can't produce the effect at will. It merely happened and or was triggered by some non-conscious mechanism. At first, I paid no particular attention to the phenomena, attributing the dream visions to release of material from the unconscious. A major event brought it strongly to my attention. It is important enough to take directly from the notes. 7559. During the early morning, the valve opened again. What I saw has concerned me only because it was so vivid. I was about to board a commercial plane. Standing by the door of the plane waiting was D.D., a man I've known for more than 10 years. I got on the plane and took a seat. I noticed that there were plenty of seats, and the plane was almost ready to go, so I was sure my friend would make it aboard. I noticed a group talking up in front near the door. They joined a young Negro man who had just come in the door. They were very jolly and were glad the young Negro was going along. The group was composed of two older Negro men and an older white man and a young Negro. They noticed that the plane was about to leave, so they all went down the aisles past me and took their seats. I leaned forward to see if my friend will get on, and in doing so I became aware that the woman in front of me was agitated. Just as the plane was starting, my friend got aboard and took a seat. I was about to get up and go over to join him when the plane started to move, and I sat back. The plane stared down the runway and seemed to take a long time to get off. I grew a little tense. We finally took off, and we climbed low over boulevard streets. winding with clover leaf intersections. They stayed at low altitude, and the plane climbed very little. In a few moments, I heard the stewardess speak through the plane's speaker system. She stated that in a few minutes, the pilot would decide whether to take the plane on one or two rights. One to the left going around, or under the wire route. After a few moments wait, I noticed that the plane passed a given point lower over a city, and I realized before the hostess spoke again that we were taking the under the wire route. When the hostess announced it, her voice seemed a bit too light and too casual, and I could sense a slight tension in her, too. Look out the plane window. I saw the area ahead with wires stretched out in every direction. The plane approached and went under the wires, staying very low. I was tense and watched ahead, looking for an opening in the wires that we could climb up through. Then up ahead, I could see the end of the wires over us, and there was sunlight beyond. I began to relax slightly because it looked like we were going to make it. At that moment, the plane dropped suddenly and bounced against the street. As it did, something broke off the plane very near me. I jumped or fell to the street some 6 or 8 feet below me. I watched where I had fallen as the plane moved upward and away from me after the bounce, and then plunged off to the right and into the empty space between two buildings. Huge clouds of smoke partially obscured the crash. My first reaction after the crash was to thank God for the miracle that saved me. Second was that my family would be worried because they knew I had taken this flight, and that I should get word to them. Third was that I should hurry over to the wrecked plane to try and save some others, even though I knew it was of no use. I got up and went over to the plane wreck, and as I approached, I could see flames through the smoke. The pilot in a leather jacket and cap walked up and looked at me rather dazedly and asked why I, of all his passengers, should be picked as the one to be saved. I asked this question myself, and then the valve closed. At 7:24:59, I am about to leave on what may be the first of 4 plane trips. This first will be to North Carolina. At the thought of the trip, I have a shaky feeling. This has made me pause to think, and in view of other incidences, to review the experience related on 7/5/59. I am always slightly concerned when I travel by airplane, as I believe everyone is. I do not think anything is going to happen on the North Carolina trip, but I may have the wrong interpretation. But what do I do if a similar incident occurs at the beginning of one of these 3 trips, an exact parallel to the 7/5/59 incident? Do I get off the plane, or is it possible to break the pattern? My reading states that I will survive, but survival may mean, in this case, death transition, or that I see death not as death, but I am still alive. I honestly don't know what I will do. However, To all who love me, and I hope there are many, in the event that there is such an incident, and that the proper interpretation means that I do experience death transition rather than continuing life here, please do not be unhappy over it, for I honestly deeply feel that it is a transition, and much as I will regret the many things that I would have to do, there are things I would never do here. Some deep nostalgia, some great longing that I have tried to fulfill in my fumbling way here, I believe will again become actuality if I go home. For more than ever, I believe that the physical body is but a machine for us, for the use of I, in quotes. Therefore, once I, in quotes, have departed, the body should mean nothing. No grave, no valve. The body, as such, is unimportant. I, in quotes, am not there. By the same token, because of my interest, if any such event should occur, I will try to establish communication with those who are interested. What could prevent this? And it is certainly a possibility. Is that the other place may offer the same question as here. There may be more important matters there. I don't know. I can't promise. But rest assured, those who know me will have little difficulty in recognizing an actual communication. This is not in the least intended to be morbid. Perhaps I am overly sensitive these days, but I simply want to have it on record, so that in some small way others may be enlightened if it comes to pass. I do not want this to occur. I don't feel I'm ready, and the thought of going through it makes me very contemplative and sober, yet I am at least partially prepared for it. 10/23/59. This is written some 12 weeks after the previous entry. 4 of the 12 weeks were spent in a hospital, the remainder in a recuperative period at home. But first things first, the previous entry found me concerned with what seemed to be a problem of portent, and the definition of survival. By comparison with the dream, here is how it worked out. Recognition 1. I started on a trip, as it indicated, a trip to North Carolina. The first indication of similarity occurred when I got into the bus that takes passengers from the New York Air Terminal to Newark Airport. I entered and sat down on the right, in the second seat from the front. Sitting there, I was overwhelmed with a sense of familiarity. It was the position I was in relative to the door, the pattern of the door rail, and the door shield. This made me alert, as I thoroughly recognized this placement as what I originally interpreted in the precognition as the airplane. It was not the airplane, it was the bus to the airport. Recognition 2. 4 men entered the bus, 3 in dark suits, 1 in light, laughing and joking. See earlier comparison and interpretation before as Negro and white. Recognition 3. A woman took a seat directly in front of me. She became very uncomfortable and agitated. However, It was not because of me, but because of the porter's handling of one of her packages outside. Recognition 4. The impression of my friend Dee Dee standing by the door waiting, the last to get on. I looked out where the bus driver was waiting beside the door for any last-minute passengers. His face and build reminded me instantly of my friend, enough to be his brother. Photographic verification of this was to come. The mind, when unable to identify truly, picks the nearest thing to it in the mind's experience. He then got in, closed the door, last to enter, and slipped into the driver's seat almost directly opposite me. Recognition 5. In taking the Jersey Turnpike, the bus flies low and slow, or that could be the impression if compared to flying. The turnpike is built over most of the surrounding streets and roads. As I looked at the unfolding roads and curving boulevards as we traveled above them, the instant sense of familiarity and recognition came again. Only it was not the airplane, the original mistaken concept, but the bus. Recognition 6. At the airport, I was quite alert after the early signs. The plane was late in arriving, so I waited around the lobby as I sat on the bench and heard the woman's voice speaking of East and West concourse over PA system. The hollowness of the sound was again strongly familiar. East and West, left and right. Recognition 3. Recognition. Am I saying that? Recognition. Okay. The plane finally did load. When the plane finally did load, I already mean land. I momentarily wait a minute. I don't get that. When the plane finally did load, I momentarily debated whether or not to take it, not from fear, but because of the uncertain. Oh, I get it. Like everybody boarding it. Okay. So when the plane finally did load, I momentarily debated whether or not to take it, not for fear, but because of the uncertainty of what survival meant. I finally decided that it was unavoidable, that if I waited for the second flight, it would only prolong the incident. I boarded the plane. Very alert, we taxied out for takeoff. Then the hostess announced on the intercom that we would fly at 6,000 feet. I don't know if I got that right or not. Maybe it must be. It's got to be. Alright, that confirmed a low altitude. We finally took off and promptly ran into a thunderstorm with a great deal of lightning displayed. This confirmed my impression of an under-the-wire electricity flight along a recognizable symbol to me. Midway during the storm, the pilot decided to change altitude. This was not announced, but we flew up out of the storm and landed in North Carolina without incident. Upon landing, I decided that my interpretation of the accident was wrong. Promptly forgot about the whole thing. 4 days later, on a Monday morning, in the middle of a quiet, friendly chat in an office, I suffered what was later diagnosed to be a heart attack. Coronary occultation, and was taken to the hospital. I did not believe it was a heart attack and had no idea that it was until I was informed of it after an examination in the hospital complete with EKG. It took much persuading that it was so, for a reason. And every physical examination I ever had, including to the previous week, by two different insurance doctors, my heart was always pronounced very sound, with such statements as, "You'll never have to worry about your heart," and "That's one thing you won't die of, any heart problem." My mind was thoroughly conditioned against that possibility. It seems that my mind would not accept the cognitive inference of a heart attack. This seemed impossible. Therefore, it selected a catastrophe that was possible in its memory experience, i.e., an airplane crash. The mind takes the nearest seem-alike. Thus, the heart attack came through in the form of an airplane crash, which was acceptable as a possibility. 4 weeks in the hospital were eased by the use of suggestive therapy on recorded tape, which worked wonders with my morale and seemed to speed my recovery. No experiences of a psychic nature came about in the hospital, which I finally deduced was caused by the sedative barbiturates, which were given to me every 3 hours. At home, my recovery followed a standard procedure, with no recurring symptoms to date. It goes without saying that I observed very intently after that when the valve decided to open. Each time the vision presented fitted exactly with events that occurred days, months, and years later. Example of these include a visual description of the interior of a house, including paint and trim, and that was selected by my wife for us in a southern city. I recognized it immediately, and it was identical to the description in the notes made 2 years previously. Most unusual was the fact that at the time of the precognition, we had no plans or intention of moving south. Another was that 5 minutes before the broadcast of a recorded program, the valve opened and I saw the tape breaking sharply and the reels running wildly. Some 10 minutes later, during the broadcast, the tape did break and was hastily reset. Such breakage had never happened before during a broadcast, so this was not a common concern. Further, I had made all the editing splices myself and knew they were tight. The break was caused by a splice made by someone else who had used the tape previously. A third, in the office, the valve opened. To reveal a red light with the words "oil pressure." An hour later, driving home in a nearly new car, the red oil warning light flashed on. Again, this was not a subconscious worry. The car had less than 500 miles since it was new and had just been checked. The new car had an oil leak, something one does not expect or worry about with a new automobile. There are some 18 more, all of which are personal incidences of verified magnitude, previewed via the valve and later coming to pass exactly as noted, allowing for minor errors in interpretation. To date, a pattern of consistency has been established. H hissing sound plus V valve opening session equals F future event vision. On the premise that this formula has been applicable and proved 22 times, what of the other cases listed in the notes where F has not yet taken place? Without further comment, here are some where the formula has been proved as of this writing. A360 air hiss valve. An airplane passes overhead, obviously in trouble, with flaps and landing gear lower. It crashes behind a nearby hill, and my family and I rush over to try to help. When we get there, the plane is burning slowly with a deep red glow. I recognize the glow and slow burning as something different than an ordinary gasoline fire, and warn the others to stay back so they will not be injured by it, as there is nothing we can do for the dead occupants. 11561 air hiss valve. I am standing alone outside my house. The sky is mostly clear, with a broken cloud cover to the north. I see a group of aircraft emerge from the cloud cover just above. They approach, and I note that they are not typical aircraft or rockets. Behind the first wave is a row after row of strange aircraft, literally hundreds of them. They are not like any airplane I have seen before. No wings are visible, and each machine is gigantic, some 3,000 feet across. Each is shaped like a head of an arrow, V-shaped, but with no fuselage, as in our sweepwing airplanes. The V-shape is not a lifting surface, but houses the occupants in 2 or 3 decks. They sail majestically overhead. I feel a tingle of awe at the mighty power they represent. I also feel fear because somehow I know that these are not man-made. 10-20-62 air hiss valve. I am with other people in a suburban street. Looking up, I see what appear to be airplanes through a large break in the clouds. I take a closer look and realize these are a type of aircraft I've never seen before, eventually powered by something other than propellers or jets. Impression is of a unique form of rockets, but not chemical. 3 of the aircraft dive down in a descending turn. I can see they have black sides and white square windows, but no wings to speak of. The 3 make a low pass over a nearby street. Houses and buildings collapse in their wake, not from bombs, but from something emitted from the machines themselves. We all dive for a ditch for safety. 6/12/63 air hiss valve. My family and I are in a situation where the whole population of the city we live in is trying to leave. Gasoline is unavailable. Electric power has been shut off. There is a great sense of fatality among everyone. It doesn't seem to be the product of atomic war. There is no concern as to radioactive fallout. There is principally a feeling of doom and the breakup of civilization as we know it due to something momentous having taken place. a factor beyond human ability to control. 41164. Air has valve. My family and I are in a large city, and there seems to be great trouble. Everyone is trying to leave. I leave what seems to be an apartment to try to find some way for us to get out of this country. Out in the street, the whole city is in a turmoil or panic, with cars stalled or jammed together, much like an anthill that has been disturbed. There are many more personal, general, and specific, local and worldwide. Only time will bring confirmation. I hope some of them are hallucinations. And that is the end of that chapter. And what's interesting is that he's talking about these planes. And guess who else has been talking about planes all day? My son. He wanted me to buy him a little model plane, which I did. And it's online. And he's making planes out of Legos. And he's talking about planes. He's obsessed of all things about 747, Boeing 747s. Talk about synchronicity, huh? I noticed ever since I read that book, Synchronicity, and there's a lot of synchronistic events that have happened. Which, by the way, I'm just by the time you see it or hear this, I hopefully have posted that most of reading on my YouTube channels that nobody listens to. But that's not what it's about. It's about my personal growth. And if you can join me and get something out of it, then all the better. Yeah. So anyways, we're reading more of Robert Monroe's book, Journeys Out of the Body. And a never-ending cease of censorship. Claiming that my videos of my field research on orbs and things in the sky is false information, false news on Facebook. I swear to God, this place is a giant fucking shit show. And there ain't no doubt about it. It ain't no doubt about it at all. Anyways, it's chapter 2 now, round holes and square pegs. Among the many mysteries encountered, there are several that stand out as being apparently unmotivated, yet deeply profound. My only hope is that others more technically and philosophically oriented can perceive in them purpose and reason which I cannot. Here are a few of those which do not seem to be of locale 2 or 3. And sorry if I sound negative, but there's so much negative in my life. And I've tried everything, and positive affirmations to positive thinking to religion to this, that, the other, and it just still just pours on me. That's what convinces me that this place is the people out there who are saying that it's a reincarnation, still trapped matrix. Yeah, it probably is. They might be on to something. 8:23:63 evening. I laid down to take a short nap, not for any extra physical activity. At 77 in the den was 7:17. Sorry about that. In the den on the couch, the moment I stretch out horizontally and close my eyes, there was a tremendous soundless explosion. There was no time lag. It occurred about 2 seconds after I closed my eyes. The blast slammed me across the room and against the wall in the opposite corner, where I slid to the floor. My first thought was that there actually had been some kind of explosion in the house, as the light fixtures overhead seemed to be sputtering and throwing off blue sparks. Then the wires themselves melted. The lights were turned off when I lay down, in the room half dark. It seemed to me as if some huge short circuit had taken place in the wiring. There was a tingling sensation similar to electrical shocks, not like the vibrations I had mentioned so many times. Then I looked across the room. My physical body was still lying relaxed on the couch. I could see it plainly. It was then that I seriously considered another possibility. This might be death, true death, instead of the typical out-of-body experience. This situation was such an unusual thing. Perhaps I had died. My heart had stopped. I was still a little dazed from the explosion, but I was not afraid, nor did I panic. If this was death, so be it. I lay there in the corner for some time, trying to collect myself. I felt around under me, and I thought I felt the rug, but I was not sure. At least something felt solid under me. Then I decided that I should try to get back in the physical. Even if I failed, I would lose nothing by trying. With a great effort of will, I floated upward and over to the couch, then down. There was a wrenching effect. I found myself half in my body. I realized the half condition wiggled and squirmed just as you would wiggle your hand to put on a glove. In a moment I was whole again. I sat up physically, turned on the light. Everything seemed normal. The house was quiet. My body seemed normal. I swear to the pains I go through. If it's not my shoulder pains, then it's my chest and my stomach. And it's been going on forever. God. Except that I was covered with goose pimples. I was quite shocked by the experience and still don't know what caused it and why. What was it an explosion of a non-physical category? Was it an internal thing in me, or was it the effect of some outside force? In retrospect, there seemed to be nothing unusual in my physical, emotional, or mental condition at the time to trigger it. An analysis of the best recall I can muster of the instant of the explosion, it was as if some stray beam had swept through a room and just happened to catch me impersonally in its path, the effect of which was to blow me out of the physical. Following this thought, I got the impression that the beam was the product of some experimental device not fully developed by the researchers who were testing it, i.e., all of the effects were not known of them. It strikes an associative memory relationship with the three-way device experiment. 5:59 afternoon. Today I learned about a strange device that is supposed to work three ways. About 5, I decided to try working a formula for the condition 1 through 20 LQ. I lay down in the bed, thought of the force field diagram, then started the 20 count. I didn't seem to be achieving any result. Then turned my head. My eyes were open and I glanced at the sun through the window. The day was sunny and the window was to the west. Immediately the vibrations faded in and I closed my eyes and lay back. The vibrations were a tingling in the back of my head. I followed the jaw movement procedure and they seemed to get stronger and weaker depending on my position. As expected, finally, I determined to peak tuning position. Of my jaw. This is the way I can express it. The vibrations were strong in my head, a little too strong, so I moved them down into my chest, then experienced placing them in various parts of my body. That is to say, making them stronger in a given part. Each time they passed over my lower right side, I got the burning sensation, either in the liver, kidney, or lower right colon. Foreign body and chemical there. This had happened before, although I do not remember mentioning it. I mentally wanted upward, and I floated up. Some stray thought must have come forth, because I immediately rolled in the air and dove through the floor. I momentarily heard a band playing, like turning it past a radio station on a dial. Then I was standing in an unfinished house with no windows installed as yet, materials and scraps laying around on the rough floor. Through the window was a rural countryside, trees and fields, and the house was evidently in the side of a hill, looking down into a single valley and onto a low hill on the other side. I looked down, and there was a device about 18 inches long on the floor. It appeared to be laid there just temporarily while the operator went to lunch. I picked up the device curiously, never having seen anything like it. It was rod-like, with 3 attachments spaced along it. I held it up and looked along the rod, and inadvertently aimed it at a man standing on a patio outside the open window, whom I hadn't noticed before. Nothing happened, and then the man turned and noticed me. He moved out of sight for a moment, then entered through the doorway to the right and came up to where I was standing. He smiled, and to my best recall appeared to be perfectly normal. Seeing the device in my hand, he indicated that he would show me how to use it. Pointing to the tube and open-end cylinder on the front of it, he showed me how to focus the device by moving the tube and cylinder back and forth away from a narrow beam and toward you for a wide, eventually more gentle beam or ray. He then told me to point it through another window opening where a second man outside was talking steadily and animately with someone outside our range of vision. He said to push the cylinder forward for a narrow beam. I did, and pointed the device at the man outside just as you would use a rifle. I saw nothing, no beam or ray emitted from the device. However, the man beyond the window opening instantly slumped in his chair as if he were dead. I turned to my host, frightened and worried that I had unintentionally killed the person outside. He smiled and told me to point the device again at the unconscious man outside, this time pulling back on the focus device to produce a wide beam. I did, and the unconscious man sat up and resumed his conversation as if nothing had happened. My host then led me outside. I asked the second man if he had felt anything. He stopped in his conversation, looked at me puzzled, and said no, he hadn't. I asked him if he remembered going to sleep or any lapse of time. Again he replied in the negative and turned away to continue his conversation. The man who was my host looked at me and smiled, then took me over to the other side of the house, overlooking the valley, indicating that he would show me another thing the device can do. He pointed toward the distance. A small fire was burning brightly on the hillside some 300 yards away, with smoke curling up in the sky. He told me to use an arrow beam. I aimed at the fire. I did, and immediately the fire went out. The flames shut off, as if suddenly extinguished. The smoke held for a moment or so longer, then it too was gone. I grew very excited about the gadget and asked my host to describe it to me. He did gladly. It was composed of 3 parts. He told me the cylinder was a focusing device, which I understood. In the middle was the spiral coil, which he said was a power source. Behind the power source were 3 fin-like plates, like those found in a rectifier, which he explained were not too important and that they were only shields to protect the user. He rubbed his thumb over them and they bent, showing their flexibility. He asked me if I was sure I understood. I replied that the affair looked like a large trioid, the closest thing that I could think of resembling the layout pattern. He nodded excitedly and replied, "Yes, a trioid." A triode, not oid. Triode. When I say triode. Feeling that I had to go and couldn't stay longer, I thanked him for all the information. He said he would see me again at Unremembered. My mind recognized the place. Evidently, I said yes. The Candia Azul. This was a product of my South American visit. It seemed a natural way to say whatever I was trying to say. Blue Network. My host started to nod yes, then gave me a blank, uncomprehending look, and I realized that my impression was right, but that he didn't understand the Spanish term. I then went back to the unfinished room and took off upward with a stretched leap. I went up what seemed to be only 2 or 3 floors and then stopped. The place looked like my office room but was empty. No furniture, no couch, dust on the floor, windows, and no physical body. I realized this was the wrong place or time. That where I wanted to be was still up. I started up again through the ceiling, and after 8 or 10 floors, emerged in my proper office room, sank down into my physical body, had a little difficulty with one arm, then merged completely. I sat up and opened my eyes. The clock indicated 1 hour and 5 minutes time lapse. I stretched the device, I sketched the device, then started these notes. A device that puts people to sleep, wakes them up, puts out fires, and someday I'll try to build a device. 3/11/61 night, and I thought I had made a normal return to the physical. I opened my eyes, and I was in a strange bed. A strange woman was beside the bed. She smiled as she saw me awaken. The older woman stood behind her. They expressed happiness that I had finally come to. that I had been ill for a long time, but that now I would be all right. They helped me get out of bed. I was dressed in some sort of robe, like a dressing gown. Their dress seemed normal to me. I knew for sure I wasn't the person they thought I was. I tried to tell them this, but they only humored me and seemed to think I was still in some form of delirium. I asked what day it was, and they only smiled understandingly as if I wasn't yet fully oriented. I wasn't. I was going to ask for a calendar, then decided it was better simply to find out the year. I asked a younger woman who seemed to be my wife, or the body's wife, and she replied that it was 1924, according to the Greek method of calculating time. I was sure that I couldn't stay there any longer, and despite their strong objections, went out the door into the open air. I stood there and tried to move upward and got the feeling I had to move up very far up. I tried to take off, but they were holding on to me. Nothing happened, and I became worried. I knew I was in the wrong place. Then I remembered the breathing trick and started to breathe in the gasping manner through half-closed lips. I started to rise slowly up above the building, which was U-shaped, still feeling them trying to restrain and hold me back. I breathed hard and fast and faster. I moved faster until the familiar blue blur was all around me. Suddenly I stopped, and I was high in the air over the landscape of countryside dotted with houses. It looked familiar. I thought I saw what was our house and buildings between road and river. I dove for the house, and the next moment I was merging with the physical. I sat up whole again, looked around gratefully. I was in the right place. 1760 night. This was a misdirected attempt to understate by an incalculable margin. I went through the 1 through TLQ procedure at around 11:30 p.m. in the bedroom. I went out with the thought of visiting Agnew Banson and started on the wind-blown type of trip, but returned to the physical almost immediately, or so I thought. I wasn't lying in bed. I was standing, and the room wasn't my room. A man, big and round-shouldered, was supporting me on my left. He was much taller than I. He had shoulders that seemed to glisten. Holding me up on my right was a young girl. They were forcing me to walk around the room. I was having difficulty walking, so they were half supporting me under each arm. I heard them comment about my hands, that there were something wrong or unusual about them. They were not unfriendly, but I knew positively that I was in the wrong place, and I kept my head luckily and employed the stretch and shot up out of wherever or whatever I was. After only a moment or two, merged again with the physical body. I looked around carefully physically before I moved, and I was back in my own physical body, my own bedroom. It was a long time before I turned over and was able to get to sleep. 11:23:60 night. This was the most unusual and vivid experience, and I don't know if I want any more like it. I went to bed late. I'm very tired. Around 2 in the morning, the vibrations came in promptly without induction, and I decided to do something in spite of the need to rest. Maybe this is rest. After moving out quietly and visiting several places in quick sequence, and remembering the rest need, I attempted to get back to the physical. I thought my body lying in bed, and almost immediately I was lying in bed. But I quickly realized something was wrong. There was a box-like contraption over my feet, evidently to hold the sheet off my legs. There were 2 people in the room, a man and a woman dressed in white, whom I recognized as a nurse. They were talking softly in a short distance from the bed. I gotta stop using this. It's starting to smell like something. Anyways, my first thought was that something had gone wrong, that my wife had discovered me in some kind of coma and had rushed me to the hospital. The nurse, the sterile atmosphere of the room, the bed, all supported this, but something still didn't feel right. After a moment, the 2 stopped talking, and the woman nurse turned and went out the room. The man approached the bed. I grew panicky because I didn't know what he was going to do. I became more so as he bent over the bed and held gently but firmly onto each of my arms at the biceps, and looked at me with bulging, glistening eyes. Worst of all, I desperately tried to move, but could not. It was as if every muscle in my body were paralyzed. Inwardly, I withered in panic, trying to get away as he brought his face down closer to me. Then, to my utter astonishment, he bent over further and kissed me on each cheek. I actually felt his whiskers. The glistening in his eyes was tears. He then straightened up, released my arm, and walked slowly out of the room. Through my terror, I knew that my wife had not taken me to the hospital, that this man was a stranger, that I was again in very much the wrong place. I had to do something, but all the will I could muster didn't have any effect. Slowly I became aware of a hissing in my head, much like a strong stream or air hiss. Through some dim knowing, I concentrated on the hiss and began to pulsate it, i.e. modulate it soft and loud. I began the pulsating. I made the pulsating go faster and faster in frequency, and in a few moments it had accelerated to a higher order of vibration. I then tried to lift out and succeeded smoothly. Moments later, I was conversing with another physical body. This time I was cautious. I felt the bed. I heard familiar sounds outside the room. The room was dark. When I opened my eyes, I reached for the place where the light switch should be, and it was there. I turned on the light and sighed with great relief. I was back. 6/7/63 night. After some time, I started to leave, and outside of the house I met a woman who was flying also. She reminded me that we would be late in getting back where I didn't know, and that we might have trouble getting in. Then we approached what seemed to be a large institution, a hospital, ? And happily went directly through a door without opening it, apparently to avoid the guard who was waiting, and a bed check and reporting and late, which implied some penalty. Inside we split up, and immediately a man, a friendly doctor type, said that he would take care of me, that I should wait in the second office to the right. I did, although I got confused about which office, because each of the offices had several people in them in deep conversation, and I remained unnoticed. However, I waited in the second, and finally the man entered and examined me and stated that I would need treatment. He then spoke of titration and treatment rising to 1500 cc, then receded back again to normal, whatever that means. I asked him why the treatment was necessary, and he replied so that the universe or humankind can develop and improve. I again asked why, meaning why the need for improvement. He didn't answer. I was somewhat apprehensive about the treatment. Then shortly thereafter, I felt the need to return to the physical, and did so without incident. 7/13/61 afternoon tonight. On a visit to Cape Cod, I arrived in Hyannis somewhat tired, and lay down in the afternoon for a rest. Upon relaxation, the usual lifting out process occurred, and I found myself drifting over the back area of a house near the garage. A dog was in the yard, a large German Shepherd. Type. And when he noticed me, he barked excitedly. A man came around the edge of the house, right side facing the rear, pulling a gun, and aimed it at me. I withdrew hurriedly before I could realize that perhaps bullets couldn't hurt me. I returned to lay in bed and thought it was over, and was able to recall no more than the fact that the man seemed very tall. That evening, after going to bed, the surge came again. I drifted out. I was floating over several houses, trying to decide what to do, when suddenly this tall man appeared in front of me, the same one, and stopped me merely by being in my way. I got the impression of a calm strength. He asked me why I wanted to see the president. I was surprised at first because I didn't have any peculiar desire to see Eisenhower. That was my mind connotation of a president. But I made up the idea of a plan for peace and told the tall man about it. He then asked how we can be sure you are loyal to the United States. I replied, still confused, that I was sure proper information. I would sure, it didn't say share, but it says sure proper information on me was in, I sure proper information on me was in Washington. He then said, after a moment, that I could not see the president at this time. I consented agreeably, and returned. Lying in bed thinking it over, I first realized that Eisenhower was no longer the president. Of course, I also suddenly had a very deep conviction that Kennedy had a psychic bodyguard, or rather mind guard. I then realized that Kennedy might be there in Hyannis that weekend. I got up and went downstairs and found a local paper, and on the front page was a story that Kennedy was arriving at Hyannis that afternoon. I had not seen the paper. I have not seen a paper for the past 2 days. These represent a sampling of the many events that defy classification, especially in terms of plain everyday dreams. It may be that each is but a fragment of a living mural someday to be seen in its entirety. I hope one does not have to die to obtain a total view. And that's the end of chapter 12. And I'm in a lot of pain. I need to lay down.
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you're going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
Don't know, you should take it slow. Are you searching? Is it hard to find? If you're broken, running out of time, what you don't have is any peace of seasons don't change who we are. The good is gone, but there's nowhere to go. If I can't go, will you take me there? I won't break